You're not going to believe what I saw that night, Hell. I still don't believe it myself. But I can feel it. Every time I close my eyes, it's there, burned into my vision like a photograph you can't tear up. The light, that impossible light coming from a place where nothing should be alive. It started like this. I was walking home late, the kind of late where the streets go silent and every shadow seems to lean toward you. The wind was calm, the air heavy, and the moon was nothing but a thin slice of silver behind clouds. I was cutting through the path that runs past the edge of town, the one nobody really uses anymore because of the house. Everyone knows the abandoned place. Kids used to dare each other to go inside. People said it had been empty for over 40 years, ever since the last owner vanished. And yet, that night, when I passed by the rusted gate, I saw it, a flicker, quick at first, like the brief spark of a dying bulb, then another, and another dot. Now, that house hasn't had power since before I was born. The lines were cut, the windows boarded, the place left to rot. But through the cracks in those rotting boards, light was slipping out. A pale, cold light, not the yellow glow of a lamp, but something that almost looked alive. I froze. My mind ran through excuses, maybe teenagers, maybe flashlights, maybe someone filming some urban exploration video, but the light didn't move like that. It pulsed, it breathed, and here's where my better judgment should have stepped in. I should have kept walking, pretended I never saw it. But curiosity has a way of whispering into your ear, even when fear is screaming. I told myself I'd just take a closer look, just enough to see what was going on, that the closer I got, the more wrong it felt. The air turned colder, not a normal night chill, but a sharp drop, like stepping into a freezer. My breath came out in quick, cloudy bursts. The weeds in the front yard, stiff and dry a moment ago, swayed as though something unseen had brushed past them. The front porch groaned when I stepped onto it, the boards sagging under my weight. I leaned toward one of the boarded windows, and that's when I realized the light wasn't just inside, it was moving. Slowly, almost deliberately, something shifted deep inside my chest, like my heart was warning me. But the front door was right there, swollen in its frame, paint peeling in long strips, and I swear I thought I heard a faint sound. It was like a low hum, almost a vibration in the wood itself. I pressed my palm against the door. Cold, too. Cold, I told myself again, just a quick look, then I'd be out. The door, despite looking like it hadn't been touched in decades, swung inward with a creak that was far too smooth for its condition. It didn't stick or groan like I opened as if it had been waiting. Inside, the smell hit me first. Damp wood, rot, and something faintly metallic. The hallway stretched forward, swallowing the light from outside, but in the distance, faint and flickering, I saw it. That impossible glow. It was coming from a room at the far end. I stepped inside, letting the door ease shut behind me. At least, that's what I thought. But as soon as it clicked into place, the light in the distance pulsed, as if it had noticed me. Each step I took made the air heavier. My boots scuffed against warped floorboards, and every sound seemed to echo too much, like the walls were leaning in to listen. My eyes adjusted, revealing the faded wallpaper, curling in on itself like peeling skin. That's when I heard it, the faintest creak from somewhere deeper inside. Not from me, not from the wind. I told myself again, just see the source of the light, then leave. But I think, deep down, I already knew there was no leaving on my terms. The glow ahead swelled, bright enough now that it cast long warped shadows on the walls. I could make out frames hanging crooked, their glass fogged over as though something had breathed on them from the inside. I reached the doorway where the light was spilling out. My hand hovered over the frame. For a moment, I didn't want to cross it. Some part of me knew once I stepped inside, I'd be part of whatever was happening here. I took a breath, stepped through. The room was empty, no lamps, no candles, people, just that light, hovering in the center like a mist, swirling slow and silent. It wasn't normal light. It didn't just illuminate, it touched. It clung to the furniture, to the walls, as if it were tasting them. And then, the light moved toward me. I didn't breathe, I didn't move. My instincts screamed to run, but my feet wouldn't listen. The glow stretched like a hand, brushing over my jacket. Where it touched, the fabric dampened instantly with a cold that sank into my skin. I took one step back. The floorboard groaned, the light froze, and in that silence, I heard something that made my blood turn to ice. A door somewhere behind me slammed shut hard. The sound didn't echo like it should have. It thudded through my ribs, a deep and final sound, like the house itself was sealing me in. The slam wasn't just a sound, it was a statement. It was the kind of noise that doesn't fade naturally into silence, but rather hangs there, vibrating in your bones long after it's over. I didn't turn around right away. Maybe I was afraid of what I'd see, or maybe I was afraid that if I looked, I'd find nothing at all, which somehow felt worse. The light in front of me trembled, dimming just enough that the room's corners sank back into shadow. My mind was doing backflips trying to process it. Doors don't just slam in a house with no wind. No people, no reason, unless there is a reason. I forced myself to turn. The hallway was darker now. The faint spill from the boarded windows reduced to almost nothing. My eyes strained to make sense of shapes. And then I saw it. One of the doors down the corridor, the one I had passed earlier, was now shut. I could have sworn it had been open. "Hello," I called out before I could stop myself. My voice came out quieter than I intended, swallowed by the thick, damp air. No answer. The silence pressed in harder, like the house was listening, waiting for me to speak again. My pulse thumped in my ears. I glanced back toward the floating light, but it was gone. Not faded, not flickered out, just gone, like it had never been there. The room felt colder without it. My breath plumed in front of me. I could smell that faint metallic taste again, stronger now. It reminded me of blood, though I didn't want to admit it to myself. I stepped into the hallway. Every movement felt amplified, my footsteps snapping against the wood, like twigs breaking in a forest. Halfway down the hall, I passed the first door. The one that had been open earlier was now shut so tightly that the frame looked warped, as though it had been nailed from the inside. I put my hand on the knob, ice cold. When I twisted it, nothing happened. It didn't even rattle. I pulled harder, nothing. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I wasn't alone here. I couldn't see them, couldn't hear them, but something was moving in this place, just out of sight. I started back toward the front door. I needed to leave. My curiosity had burned away, replaced by that primal instinct to escape. When I reached the entryway, the door was shut, but not like before. This time the wood looked different, older. The peeling paint had flaked away entirely, exposing dark, splintering boards beneath. It didn't look like the same door I had walked through minutes earlier. I grabbed the handle and twisted. It turned, but the door didn't open. It felt heavy, as though there was something leaning against it from the outside. I shoved my shoulder into it. Nothing. That's when I heard the creak of footsteps behind me, slow even, coming from the hallway. I didn't want to turn. My body screamed to keep facing the door, to keep pushing, to get out, but the sound was magnetic. It pulled my head over my shoulder before I could stop it. The hallway was empty. Then another slam. This time it came from a door upstairs. I hadn't noticed the staircase before, but there it was, just beyond the entryway, curling upward into darkness. The sound had come from above, and it had weight to it, like something big had moved. For a second, I considered yelling again, but my throat had gone dry. Instead, I just stood there, staring up at the stairs. And then I saw it. Light. The same pale, impossible light I had seen before, spilling from a room at the top of the stairs. Only this time, I could see movement inside. It a shape. It wasn't clear. Just the faintest outline of a figure, standing completely still, its head tilted slightly as though listening. My breath hitched, and then, slowly, the figure stepped forward. The first step creaked like it was announcing me. I froze mid-step, my body leaning forward just enough to feel the stale air rising from above. It had that damp, cellar-like smell, but sharper, tinged with something acidic, like old water that had been sitting in a rusted tin for decades. The figure in the pale light didn't move. It just stood there, framed by that doorway at the top of the stairs, head still slightly tilted. The strange thing was, I couldn't make out a face. Even with that glow spilling all around it, the features stayed hidden, swallowed in shadow. I told myself it was just a trick of the light, my brain filling in gaps. But then it shifted just barely, and the sound it made wasn't human, not footsteps. More like the brittle crack of dry twigs under weight. A whisper tickled my ear from behind me. Go up. I whipped around. No one. The front door loomed there, still swollen shut like before, its warped wood absorbing what little light there was. I turned back toward the stairs. The figure was gone, but the light was still there. My hand tightened on the railing, splinters pricking my palm. I moved up one step at a time, each board bending slightly under my weight. My heart kept pace with my movements, pounding harder the closer I got. Halfway up, I heard something, a faint dragging sound above me, like someone pulling something heavy across the floor. Then a sharp thud. Hello, my voice cracked. Immediately, I regretted speaking. A long pause. Silence so deep I could hear my own breath rattling. Then 3 knocks from above. slow, deliberate, evenly spaced. I froze mid-step, the kind of stillness where even blinking felt dangerous. My mind screamed to turn back, to get out, but the front door might as well have been a brick wall now. So I kept climbing. When I reached the landing, I realized the light wasn't spilling from a single open door. It was leaking from under several doors down the hallway, each glowing faintly, like they were backlit by something unnatural. The first door on my right was half open. I hesitated, leaning just enough to peek inside. The room was empty at least. At first glance, the wallpaper had peeled into curling strips, the floor warped by water damage, and in the center, a chair. Not just any chair, it was the kind you see in old interrogation rooms. Heavy metal legs, bolted to the floor. I stepped in, my shadow stretched unnaturally across the wall, twisting in ways my body didn't match. I blinked. It returned to normal. A sudden gust of cold air swept across my face, even though the windows were boarded tight. It carried that metallic tense again, stronger now. My mouth went dry. The door slammed shut behind me. I spun around, lunging for the handle, but it wouldn't budge. That same cold seeped into my fingers. My breath came in quick bursts, frosting in the air. And then I heard it, a voice, low and close, as if someone's lips were almost touching my ear. "Sit down." I turned, scanning the room. Empty, but the chair, it had moved. It was closer. I stepped back, hitting the wall. The light in the hallway flickered, dimming, until the only illumination in the room was an eerie glow pooling around the base of the chair. Something in my head whispered, not in words, but in pure sensation, that if I sat, I'd never get up again. The dragging sound returned, louder now, and this time it was coming from above me. The ceiling groaned like it couldn't bear the weight of whatever moved there. Dust sifted down, catching in the pale light. The door unlocked on its own, slowly. The knob turned without a hand touching it. I didn't wait. I yanked the door open and bolted into the hallway. The other doors along the corridor began to shut one by one, slamming so violently the frames shook. Boom, boom, boom. Each slam was closer to me. By the time I reached the end of the hall, only one door was left open, the one spilling the brightest light yet. It called to me, not with sound, but with that same pulling sensation I'd felt before. I knew I shouldn't go in. I also knew I would, because whatever was inside, it was waiting. The doorway hummed, not with sound, but with a vibration I could feel in my teeth. The air inside the room was unnaturally still, thick, almost syrup-like, and stepping through it felt like wading into deep water. The light wasn't coming from a lamp or a window. It came from the walls themselves. They pulsed faintly, as if breathing, casting soft glows that shifted in color, pale amber to deep red, then back again. My stomach churned. The floor was different here. Not warped wood, not dusty carpet, smooth, cold stone. My footsteps echoed softly, but not in sync with my movement. They were delayed, like someone else was following me a half-beat behind. I didn't turn around. In the center of the room was a table. Old, heavy, made of oak. On it sat a single object. A small glass jar, the kind you'd keep nails or screws in, but this one wasn't empty. Inside was hair. Human hair. Tangled, matted, dark, with something that looked like dried blood. The moment my eyes locked on it, the door behind me slammed. This time, I didn't even flinch. Somehow, I knew it would. I reached out, hand trembling. My fingertips were inches from the jar when the light in the room dimmed to a deep, suffocating crimson. The air temperature dropped so sharply it felt like needles against my skin. And then came the whisper. Not from one direction, everywhere. Above, below, around me. A chorus, speaking in a language I didn't know but understood all the same. "It's not yours." I snatched my hand back. My breath fogged in front of me. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard it almost hurt. A sudden, violent thump came. From under the table, I jerked backward, knocking into the wall, which rippled like the surface of water. The thump came again, louder, closer, until something started to push upward from beneath the stone floor. Cracks spread out in jagged lines, glowing faintly from underneath. The table trembled. The jar rattled and rolled toward me. I caught it instinctively. The moment I touched it, everything changed. The room tilted, not like I was falling, but as though the entire space had shifted on some unseen axis. My stomach flipped. The walls stretched upward into darkness. The air became dense, oppressive. I saw flashes, not memories, visions. A woman sitting in that same chair I'd seen earlier. Her face pale, eyes wide, mouth sewn shut with black thread. A hand, unseen, pressing down on her shoulder. The sound of nails dragging along wood. The same woman. now standing at the far corner of this very room, her head twitching slightly as if trying to break free from invisible restraints. And then, me standing exactly where I was now, holding the jar. The vision snapped away. I was back in the room, the jar still in my grip. The floor was still cracked, but whatever had been pushing from underneath had stopped. The whispers returned, softer. This time, you brought it here, now you can't leave. A slow, deliberate click echoed from behind me. The door was open again. Against every ounce of instinct I had, I stepped toward it, clutching the jar like it might somehow protect me. The hallway outside was different now, shorter, narrower, and at the very end, a door that hadn't been there before, the light spilling from under it, was the same deep crimson that had filled the room. I started walking toward it, each step heavier than the last dot behind me. The other doors I'd passed before began to creak, open, not slamming this time, but yawning wide, slow and deliberate. From the corners of my eyes, I saw pale hands, too thin to be human, reaching out from the darkness inside each room, their fingers twitching in slow, insect-like motions. Didn't run. Running didn't feel like an option anymore. By the time I reached the crimson-lit door, my breathing was shallow and my fingers had gone numb around the jar. I touched the doorknob, warm, almost hot. The second I turned it, the light went out. Everything went black. I stepped through anyway. The darkness wasn't empty. It had weight, a presence that pressed against my skin, wrapping around me like wet cloth. My footsteps didn't echo anymore. In fact, I couldn't even hear them, like the floor had absorbed the sound entirely. Held the jar tighter. I don't know why. Maybe because it was the only thing that felt real in that moment. After a few slow steps, something shifted above me. A faint creak, as if a beam had settled or something had crawled across it. My head tilted upward instinctively, but there was no ceiling, only more darkness. I reached into my pocket for my flashlight, even though I was terrified of what I might see. The beam flickered to life, weak and yellow, cutting through just a few feet ahead, before being swallowed by the black. That's when I realized the hallway I'd stepped into was impossibly long. Not just long, the walls weren't parallel. They seemed to curve inward and outward in places, like the entire corridor was breathing. Then came the sound, a slow, rhythmic thud, faint at first, like a heartbeat. It came from ahead, but also inside me. Every time it pulsed, the floor trembled just slightly under my feet. I took another step forward. On my left, a door materialized. I swear it wasn't there a second ago. Its wood was pale, almost white, with no handle. My breath clouded in the beam of the flashlight as I reached out and pressed my palm against it. It was warm. The thud grew louder. I pressed harder, and the door opened, not outward, not inward, but like the wood dissolved at my touch. The room inside was small, claustrophobic, with walls covered in faded floral wallpaper that peeled away in damp curls. In the center sat a rocking chair, moving slowly, back and forth on its own. I stepped inside. The second my foot crossed the threshold, the door behind me sealed shut. The rocking chair stopped, and then it turned. Not like someone had moved it. It pivoted on its own, facing me now. And there, sitting in it, was the woman from my vision, the one with her mouth sewn shut. Up close, her skin was pale, stretched too tightly over her bones. The black thread in her lips was frayed, like she'd been pulling at it. Her eyes wide, glassy, and unblinking locked on mine. Her chest rose and fell, rapid and shallow, as she was trying to speak. The threads quivered as she forced a muffled, wet sound past them. I wanted to back away, but my legs wouldn't move. She pointed at the jar in my hand. Her eyes grew frantic. She pointed again, harder, this time her entire body trembling. Before I could react, the rocking chair lurched forward, gliding toward me without touching the floor. I stumbled back, my shoulder slamming into the wall. The jar slipped in my grip, but I caught it just before it fell. Her breathing turned into a desperate, ragged hiss. I don't know why I did it, maybe out of fear, maybe because some part of me thought it would make her stop, but I unscrewed the jar's lid. The moment the metal threads gave way, every sound in the room cut out. The woman's eyes rolled back, her body sagged in the chair, and from the jar, something poured out. It wasn't smoke or light or anything I could name. It was a distortion like heat waves rising off asphalt. It writhed in the air before sinking into the floor. The chair was empty now. The heartbeat sound returned, twice as loud, rattling the floorboards. The wallpaper around me began to peel away in huge strips, revealing something beneath, not plaster, not wood, but what looked disturbingly like muscle tissue. It flexed and contracted, oozing a dark, syrupy fluid. The thud came again, and the entire room seemed to lurch. A crack split open in the center of the floor, spreading outward until it reached my feet. The distortion that had escaped from the jar was down there, swirling like a storm dart. And then I heard it, a voice, deep and resonant. Not from any one place, but from everywhere at once. Now you've done it. The floor gave way. I fell, not down, exactly, more like sideways, into a space that shouldn't exist. I landed hard, the jar shattering beside me. Its contents, what little remained, spilled out and seeped into the ground. I pushed myself up, my hands pressing into something soft and warm. When I looked around, I realized I wasn't in a room anymore. I was inside the walls. They pulsed, faintly, like living flesh. Somewhere far off, the heartbeat kept going, faster now, and then, in the distance, I saw another door, but this one was breathing. The door ahead expanded and contracted with each breath, the wood bending subtly as if its fibers were made of something organic. Every time it inhaled, the air around me pulled toward it, tugging at my clothes, my hair. Every time it exhaled, the stench of damp rot and iron flooded my nostrils. I approached slowly, my palms brushing against the walls of this place. They were warm to warm, too warm, and faint vibrations traveled up my arms, like the hum of an enormous unseen machine. The heartbeat was deafening now. I reached for the breathing door, but the moment my fingers grazed its surface, a shiver ran through. It's something on the other side pressed back slowly, deliberately matching the placement of my hand. I froze. The pressure increased, and then, without warning, the door's mouth opened, splitting down the middle. The edges curled outward, slick with a translucent fluid, and a corridor stretched beyond it longer than should have been possible. Lined with hundreds of other doors, they weren't still. Some shook violently. Others whispered in soft, unrecognizable voices. A few clicked open and shut repeatedly, like they were impatient for something to step inside. I stepped over the threshold, the breathing door sealing behind me with a wet thunk dot. The temperature dropped instantly. My breath formed clouds in front of me, and yet the floor beneath my boots radiated heat. I walked, each step echoing too loud for a hallway this narrow. Halfway down, I noticed a door that was slightly ajar. A thin line of licello and trembling spilled onto the floor. I hesitated, then pushed it open. Inside was a kitchen, an old one with avocado green cabinets and a formica table, straight out of the 1970s. The smell of burnt toast hung in the air, that the faucet dripped steadily into a rust-stained sink. And then I saw it on the table. A plate with 3 slices of bread, perfectly toasted, but in each one was a bite mark. The strange part, the bites weren't human. They were jagged, uneven, as if something with too many teeth had taken them. From behind me, the sound of a chair scraping across the linoleum. I turned, and there it was, a figure, hunched and skeletal, seated at the table. Its skin was stretched over a skull-like face, and its jaw moved in slow, mechanical motions that it was chewing. Nothing each time it bit. The sound was wet and deep, echoing far louder than it should have. Its cloudy eyes rolled toward me, and I realized its mouth didn't have an end, it opened too far, the hinges of its jaw stretching into a black void. The thing lifted one bony finger and pointed at the door. Behind me, I didn't need to be told. Twice, I stepped backward out of the room, keeping my eyes locked on it until the door shut. When I turned back toward the corridor, the layout had changed. The straight line of doors was gone, replaced by a spiraling staircase that twisted downward into total blackness. I took a deep breath and started down. The steps were made of wood, but each one groaned like it was alive. The deeper I went, the slower the heartbeat became, until it wasn't a heartbeat at all, just a slow, heavy knock that echoed through the space. At the bottom, the staircase ended in a single massive door. Its surface was covered in carvings, dozens of them, all screaming silently. The knock came again, this time from inside. I stepped closer and the air grew heavier, pushing against me like a thick current. My fingertips brushed the wood, and every carved face turned to look directly at me. Let us out. The voices were in my head, but they weren't thoughts, they were commands. The knocking stopped, and then, from the other side of the door, something whispered my name. The sound of my name lingered in the air, almost too soft to hear, yet vibrating deep in my bones. It wasn't a voice that belonged to the living. It had no breath, no texture of lungs behind it. It was a thought injected straight into the marrow of my skull. I should have turned and run, but the moment the idea formed, the air thickened until moving felt like wading through tar. The carved faces on the door seemed to sense my hesitation, each one's mouth curling into a grimace of desperate hunger. Let us out, they pleaded again, their expressions shifting as if trapped in some eternal loop of agony and expectation. Strange warmth began to seep into my fingers where they rested on the door like heat rising from a fresh wound. My hand wouldn't lift. It was as if the wood had grown tendrils, invisible yet unyielding, coiling around my skin. "Who are you?" I whispered, not sure whether I wanted an answer. The reply came instantly, overlapping voices speaking in unison. "We are what remains when the lights go out." The carvings pulsed with a faint glow, each face illuminated from within, as though something inside them strained to escape. And then, the knock came again. This time it was slow, deliberate, 3 beats. Boom, 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 but it wasn't a request, it was a warning. A shadow passed beneath the door, thick, shapeless, and impossibly tall. My grip loosened, as though whatever force had been holding me in place had let go, but only so I could take the next step willingly. I swallowed, the air now tasting faintly metallic. I pulled the door, groaned, the screaming faces stretching and twisting as it opened inch by inch. Warm, moist air spilled out, and with it came a sound wet, rhythmic, like something chewing in the dark. When the gap was wide enough, I peered inside. It wasn't a room, it was a vast, endless space of blackness, like looking into the throat of some colossal creature. The walls, if they could be called that, were ribbed, flexing subtly as though breathing, from the center of the darkness. 2 points of faint light appeared, low to the ground. They moved with a sickening sway, accompanied by the dragging sound of something heavy pulling itself forward. The chewing stopped. The light's eyes, I realized, blinked slowly, their pale glow reflecting off the glistening floor. Then came the voice again, softer this time, almost tender. "Come closer, you've already been here before." My legs moved without permission. Step after step, I crossed into the blackness, the door closing behind me with an echo that seemed to erase the concept of outside entirely. The air inside was humid and warm, carrying a smell I could only describe as a mixture of earth, after rain, and something long dead. Beneath my feet, the floor gave slightly, as if I were walking on stretched leather. Each step produced a faint squelch that I stayed perfectly still, watching. Then the space shifted. No walls, no corners. The feeling of something circling me. I could hear it move, slow and deliberate, dragging those unseen limbs against the wet floor. "Do you remember the kitchen?" the voice asked. I stopped breathing, because in that moment I did remember, but the kitchen wasn't the one I had just entered in the hallway. It was my kitchen, my home. The same green tile, the same cracked counter, and on the table, 3 slices of bread, each with those same jagged bite marks. The memory flickered, glitching like an old videotape struggling to play. I wasn't sure anymore if it had happened weeks ago, or if I was remembering something that hadn't yet occurred. The voice chuckled. It was a sound like teeth grinding together. "You've been walking in here for a long time. You just keep finding new doors." I stumbled backward, my spine pressing against something solid. The door. Relief washed over me as I reached for the handle, that it wasn't there. Instead, my hand sank into the wood like it was soft clay, warm and pulsing beneath my touch. I yanked it free, now slick with something dark and viscous. The eyes moved closer. The dim glow, I saw the outline of its head elongated, smooth, with no visible mouth. But as it drew nearer, the surface of its skin split vertically, from forehead to chest, revealing row after row of thin, needled teeth. "The doors don't close on their own," it whispered, "unless I want them to." My breath caught, and then, the door behind me slammed shut with a force that made the floor shudder. I wasn't in the dark anymore, I was in another hallway, and every single door here was already open. Every open doorway stared back at me like a gaping mouth, each one breathing a faint draft that smelled subtly different, some metallic, some sweet, some so putrid I had to cover my nose. The hallway itself was unnaturally long, stretching into a vanishing point that didn't seem to obey the rules of perspective. I stepped toward the nearest door, my shoes scuffing against the warped wooden floorboards. The sound was wrong, hollow, like walking across an empty barrel. I leaned forward, just enough to see inside. It was the living room of the abandoned house, but not as I remembered it. The furniture was pristine, the wallpaper intact, a faint hum of electricity in the air. Sunlight poured in from the window, but the light didn't warm the room. It was cold, clinical, like the glow of a morgue lamp. And there, sitting perfectly still on the couch, was me. Not the me standing in the hallway, but the me from before I'd ever set foot in this place. Clean clothes, calm expression, flipping idly through a book. My eyes, the other me's eyes lifted from the page and met mine through the doorway. I froze. The other me smiled. Then, without moving its lips, I heard my own voice in my head. "Don't take another step." I jerked backward, my heel catching on the floorboard behind me. I turned only to find the hallway had grown longer, much longer. The vanishing point was now impossibly far away, the doors multiplying, dozens upon dozens lining both sides like cells in a grotesque prison. I spun again. The room with my doppelganger was gone. The doorframe now opened into a completely different scene. A child's bedroom, toys scattered on the floor, the faint sound of a music box playing an off-key lullaby. I didn't want to, but my feet carried me closer. A small wooden rocking horse sat in the center of the room, swaying back and forth as though an invisible child were riding it. The walls were covered in drawing Scrooge stick figures, all with black circles for eyes. Some of them had lines trailing down from the circles, like tears. Then I noticed something worse. The floor wasn't dusty like the rest of the house. It was damp. Dark patches spread outward from beneath the rocking horse, and the swaying motion was becoming faster, more erratic. The music box slowed, the notes stretching unnaturally long, like they were being dragged through mud. I stepped back, into the hallway, trying not to look into the other open doors. But they were magnetic. Each one demanded my attention. A kitchen sink overflowing with black water, ripples pulsing outward as if something beneath the surface was breathing. A narrow staircase spiraling downward into absolute darkness. The sound of whispering voices echoing from the depths. A bedroom where every piece of furniture was nailed to the ceiling. And on the bed now, hanging upside down, was a figure strapped in place, its head slowly turning toward me. Walked, the less the hallway resembled a hallway at all. The walls began to pulse faintly, as if veins ran just beneath the wallpaper. The ceiling seemed to sag in certain spots, bulging downward like something massive was pressing from above. And the doors, they were no longer wooden. The frames were now ribbed and fleshy, and the knobs replaced by small, twitching sphincters that opened and closed in slow, wet motions. One of them whispered my name, not from inside the room, the door itself. I reached out without thinking, my fingertips brushing against the warm, slick surface. The instant I made contact, images flooded my mind, the abandoned house crumbling over decades, each door opening to swallow another unfortunate intruder, their faces screaming as they were absorbed into the walls. And then I saw it, something moving at the far end of the hallway. At first it looked like a shadow, but shadows don't move independently of their sources. It was crawling on all fours, its limbs too long, its head jerking in short, sharp movements. With each twitch, its face shifted, sometimes mine, sometimes strangers I didn't recognize, sometimes faces I almost remembered from dreams. I took a step back. The doors on either side began to slam shut, one by one, as though herding me toward the thing approaching. Boom, boom, boom. The sound of the doors echoed like gunshots in the enclosed space. I turned and ran. The hallway twisted beneath me, angles changing in ways that made no sense. I passed the same door 3 times, even though I never turned around. My breathing was ragged, the air growing thicker, harder to pull into my lungs. Somewhere behind me, the creature's hand slapped against the floor, faster and faster. Then silence. I stopped, every muscle in my body screaming for oxygen. I dared to look back. Nothing. The hallway was empty, every door closed. I exhaled slowly, and then heard the knock. 3 times, directly from the door at my back. I didn't turn around immediately. You wouldn't either. That knock, it wasn't a request to be let in, it was an announcement. Something was already inside. I stood frozen, my breath shallow, feeling the wood of the door behind me vibrate. Faintly with each of those 3 impacts, the vibration seemed to travel up my spine, a sick rhythm matching the pounding of my heart. The hallway was silent again, no whispers, no creaks. Even the faint pulsing of the walls had stopped, like the house itself was holding its breath. Slowly against every instinct screaming at me, I turned. The door was different now. It wasn't the one I'd just seen. The wood was darker, warped, the handle, if you could call it, that looked more like a curved claw emerging from the surface. There was no keyhole, no gap underneath, and yet a thin ribbon of light leaked from the seams, flickering like candle flame. I reached toward it. My fingers hovered inches from the claw handle when a sound slithered through the crack. A whisper. I've been watching you since the first door. It wasn't the same voice that had called my name earlier. This one was deeper, ragged, like old rope tearing under strain. Before I could move away, the claw handle flexed, curling slightly toward my hand. I stumbled back, my shoulder hitting the opposite wall. The impact made the wallpaper ripple, not tear, not peel, ripple, as though I'd struck the surface of thick liquid. I didn't have time to react before the door swung open on its own. There was no room beyond it, no floor, just a swirling darkness, thick and slow like tar, with occasional flashes of pale shapes moving beneath the surface, shapes that almost looked like hands. but too long, too thin. And then it stepped out. The entity was taller than the doorway should have allowed, its head brushing the ceiling, even though it had to stoop to pass through. Its arms hung low, fingertips grazing the floor. It was skin hung in loose folds, mottled with patches of something that might have been mold or bruising. Its face. I've tried to tell myself since that I didn't see it clearly, that my mind filled in the details later, but the truth is, I saw every feature in perfect, obscene detail. It was my own face, just like the doppelganger earlier, but aged decades beyond my years. Eyes clouded over, mouth twisted in a permanent half smile that exposed teeth far too long to be human. When it spoke, its lips barely moved. You never should have opened the first door. I stepped backward. The hallway behind me stretched again, but this time the doors didn't just multiply, they moved, sliding along the walls like chess pieces being repositioned on a board. The hallway floor warped under my feet, rising and falling in shallow waves that threw off my balance. The thing began to advance, each step making the floorboards groan in pain. As it moved, the air around it grew colder, and with each exhale of my breath, a fine mist formed and hung in the air far longer than it should. I tried the nearest door to my left, it wouldn't open. I tried another, same thing. The handles were warm and slick, pulsing faintly as though alive. The creature tilted its head at me in slow increments, like a marionette being manipulated by a clumsy puppeteer. "You've been in every room," it said, "but not the one that matters." Its voice was layered my own, and something older, deeper, crawling underneath the sound. I asked stupidly, "Which room?" Its grin widened, and it raised one skeletal arm, pointing a crooked finger toward the far end of the hall. The problem was, there was no far end. The hallway bent sharply to the left now, vanishing behind a corner that hadn't been there a second ago. And before I could decide whether to run toward it or away, all the doors along the hall began to open. Every single one. What poured out wasn't people, it wasn't even creatures. It was versions of me, of strangers, of the same stranger multiple times at different ages. They stepped into the hallway in perfect silence, forming two lines along the walls, leaving only a narrow path between them that led straight toward the corner the entity had pointed to. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and something metallic, almost like rust. The doubles didn't blink, didn't breathe, just watched me with eyes that seemed to shift color when I wasn't looking directly at them. That the creature behind me spoke again, "Walk." And I did, because the doubles moved when I didn't. They twitched in sharp, jerking motions, their heads snapping toward me, mouths opening just enough for me to hear the faint scrape of teeth against teeth. I reached the corner and turned into a room I knew instantly, though I'd never been inside it. The walls were lined with hundreds of doors, stacked from floor to ceiling like drawers in some insane filing cabinet. Some were tiny, barely big enough for a child's hand. Others were massive, large enough for a person to step through. One in the center was marked, not with paint or symbols, but with deep scratches, each one made by something that had more than 5 fingers. It pulsed faintly. The creature appeared behind me again, though I never saw it walk in. "This is the first door," it said, and before I could understand what that meant, the door began to open on its own. The first door opened like a mouth giving up a secret. Its hinges seed along, human sound, and the light that poured through was not the soft, forgiving light of a lamp, but a cold, porcelainy glow that seemed to climb the bones of the room. The hallway behind me was full of the doubled faces, all still and watching, and the creature stood at the threshold, patient as a winter tree. For a heartbeat, everything in me wanted to turn and run. For another heartbeat, I wanted to step forward and let the house decide. Somewhere in the back of my head, I could still hear the scraping of the jars, broken glass, the tiny fall of hair into dust. The house remembered that jar. It catalogued the moment I had unscrewed the lid, the moment the thing poured out, the crack when it hit the floor. Authority and memory lived here like ivy. The house showed me scenes like evidence, the old man's indifferent grin at the flea market, the folded map with the name scrawled on it, the way I tucked the key into my hand before the lock gave. The creature's voice was a rust that settled behind my ears. "You are always the question," it said. "So answer." There was no heat in the sentence, only inevitability. The doubled people behind me shifted as if to applaud, but their faces were masks of paper and wax. The light on the other side seemed to pulse in time with the rhythm the house had invented for itself. Crossing the threshold was not a step, but a surrender. The light wrapped around my shoulders like gauze and pressed into my chest, and for a moment I tasted things I had no right to remember. My father whistling over a sink, the exact smell of my grandmother's attic in July, the sudden brightness of lightning through an open window when I was 10. Curiosity, once a soft voice, turned into an ache. Scarcity tightened its fingers. The house showed me a lost moment and then told me it could be mine to hold. If only I agreed to the small accounting. Rooms appeared and collapsed like stage sets. A kitchen with a green Formica counter. A child's bedroom with a music box playing a crooked lullaby. A living room with a TV frozen on an old sitcom. Each contained a taste of my life. Small currencies meant to pay attention. In one room, my own sleeping body lay under a blanket on a bed I recognized down to the tear at the seam. The sight lodged inside me like an accusation. Authority whispered, "This is yours to recover." Curiosity urged me closer, but the house had patience. It did not force me. It offered. It was not cruel in the way I had imagined cruelty. It was administrative. The creature explained, in images, that the house ran on exchange. People came inside and the house catalogued them. A first time opening a door, a first curiosity, a first small sin. These became units it could trade. Otherness was compressed into jars and archived on shelves I had not yet seen. Keepers were its clerks, humans who took on shifts, who supervised the ledger and ensured every exchange was recorded. I balked at the plan's efficiency. It felt like bargaining with a quiet, bureaucratic god. In a montage the house flung at me. I watched previous keepers attempt to resist. One smashed every chair and failed. Another burned walls until smoke made the house cough and adjust. A third simply sat down and wept until she became a shadow in a gallery and no longer moved, except when someone wanted her to. The moral was not that resistance was impossible. Rather, resistance put your agony on permanent display. I tried to be clever. I sought the hinge, the weak nail that might let me tear the mechanism apart. I grabbed a broken slat and jammed it into the first door's gap and pushed my shoulder against wood that had never been meant to be forced. The house responded, as houses do in nightmares. It changed. The slit widened into a new room, and that room looked like the one where my mother sat in a chair, knitting the way she used to when we were children. The house rearranged itself to accommodate my attempt at sabotage. A small, very human thought came then. This house does not create desire. It recognizes and amplifies it. I had been its accomplice the moment curiosity led me to that yard sale. It showed me that not only did I bring the key and the map, but that I had been carrying other things, like a knotted worry about a missed call and a conversation I'd never had. The house simply converted those soft weights into bait. At the center of the light there was a table, and on the table, a ledger. It lay open like a throat, pages blotched with soot and fingerprints and dates that belonged to people I had never met. The house invited me to read. The first name on the page, in a hand I recognized only by the tilt and pressure of the letters, was my own. Beside it were columns. Date opened, exchange given, keeper name. The entries beneath my name were empty. The ledger wanted completion. When the creature spoke again, it was in my voice. You can close the door, you can leave, or you can keep the house running. No hint of trickery, only the options laid out as a ledger does. Choice, annotated in ink. The authority here was sterile, persuasive. It cloaked itself in the language of practicality because the most dangerous bargains always do. I remembered the jar, the hair, the way the woman in the rocking chair had pointed at it with frantic eyes. I remembered unscrewing the lid, even though every cell in my body told me not to. I remembered the thing that poured out and how the floor flexed, how you could feel the house swallow a sound. The memory was a small, private proof. The house could take and it could give, but the cost was never revealed in full. It was a ledger, not a confession. The light bowed me into rooms that looked like my life and like lives that could have been mine. It showed me the friend whose laugh I hadn't answered the week before, the neighbor who watered his plants, the old teacher's crooked glasses. Authority and scarcity braided together into a persuasive rope. Tend the house, and you get one safe memory, one returned thing, one choreography of grief made tidy. The thought of relief was narcotic and terrible. I could feel the keeper's role slipping into me like an ill-fitting glove. I wanted to refuse, to smash the ledger and walk away while the house still hummed with incompleteness. So I tried to run. I dashed back toward the carved frame and the hallway, expecting the world I'd known outside to be waiting. The doubled faces clapped silently as if in reward for my decision. The creature inclined its head, as though curious what I would choose. But the house does not permit sudden departures. The door narrowed, the hallway rearranged into a labyrinth, and then, cruelly, straightened into my own street, a trick of geometry meant to disorient. When When I reached what I thought was the front door, it was not the front door at all, but a small replica, child-sized, with a label scratched so faintly I had to squint. Name. The heart inside me stuttered. The house had learned the perfect language. To keep me, I stood in that narrow replication of my life and felt the ledger, the jar, and my own threadbare morality pull in opposite directions. The doubles, the creature, the ledger, they watched not with hatred but with an attention that felt worse. Curiosity turned professional. The house gave me one last vision, my mother at a window, looking out as if waiting for me to come home. I felt a longing so deep it was almost audible, as if I could hear the thread of missing conversations snapping. The decision, when it came, was not cinematic. I did not issue grand sentences or raise my fist to the sky. I stepped out of the light. I let the glow slide past my back like the close of a lover's palm. The carved frame exhaled a long, disappointed sigh. The ledger on the table snapped shut. Outside the hallway was the hallway again, warped and tired. The creature had vanished into shadow. The doubles dissolved into faces that looked like mirrors without reflections. I moved through the house, like a man who had been underwater too long, my lungs buckling as if I had been holding breath for years. The front door I reached this time was the one that belonged to the world, weathered, paint-flaked, handle warm from my touch. I pushed it open and emerged into the night. That had been there the first time I walked past the gate. The moon a thin, scissors of silver, the weeds leaning like disinterested worshippers. The ordinary air tasted like coin, metallic and small. I walked to my car and did not look back. I wanted to believe that stepping away had closed something forever, but the house has a ledger not only of moments but of promises. As I started my engine, a sound threaded through the ordinary night. 3 knocks, slow, deliberate. The rhythm opened a hollow under my skin. For a moment I thought it was the gate, or the branch of a tree striking a sign. Then I realized with a slow, stomach-souring clarity, the sound came from inside my chest, as if the house had placed a bookmark on my ribs. If I had become the keeper, the sound would mean that the day had come for me to take my shift to tend the ledger, to open the small dollhouse doors for others hungry enough to answer their own curiosity. If I had not, the sound was a promise that this was not over. The house did not forget. It tacked its invitations like stamps in the world, and they could come back to you in the form of a rhythm behind the eyes. I sat in my car with the engine ticking, and the night's ordinary noises folding around me, and I felt the pull of the yard sale map and the warm weight of the key in my pocket. Curiosity had been the first push. Scarcity had shown me what I missed. Authority had laid the terms. The house had offered me a ledger, and then my name on the first blank line. I had chosen to step away. For now, I do not know if walking away will keep the house from calling me again. Maybe the ledger simply marked me as someone who knew Ho.